Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to this month's R Talk. Just want to make sure everybody watching on Zoom can see and hear. If you can't, speak up and let us know, and we'll try to do something different. So we've been planning this talk for a while, and it's going to be a really exciting one. This is Ben McKee, who teaches here at Yavapai College, and he's going to try to explain this thing that we've been hearing about called AI. And this is being recorded, so if anybody wants to watch it again or send it to some of their friends around the world, you can just contact me in the next couple of days and I can get you a link. Okay, and so Ben McKee, thank you so much for putting all this together, and we're interested in hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys all for coming. I'm just gonna, I can see real quick, I'm gonna move this over so we can get both of these screens, because gotta be a little extra and have two going at the same time. So the fun thing about this is the second screen that's over here running stuff that's not a slideshow. It's all being generated right now. So it is being run in real time. It's about 100 sort of prompts that I put together, just text blocks that it's generating based off of stuff I found. Some of it's random, some of it's mine, some of it's just, you know, stuff found online as far as the text goes, but all the images are 100% unique. There's never been any of them existing in the world before. But to make that happen, it's also running off of my desktop, which I had to schlep over here. And you know, Tim's been nice enough to turn off the heat because this is probably taking care of most of that for the evening. Because it puts out quite a bit of heat on it. So few things. One, that slideshow that's running, because it is all being generated in real time, I don't know what's going to show up there. I've set it up as best I can to prevent anything that's obscene or anything else like that coming up, but it's still, who knows? In the 20 or 30 times I've watched it, nothing bad's really come up. So we'll just keep our fingers crossed if it does. What's up?
I have a question already.
All right, but after yours, we're gonna say them all at the end.
It'd be cool to see the prompt next to it.
What's that?
It'd be cool to see the prompt that created it.
So what I'm gonna do is, when this is done, there's a handout over here if you want to grab on the way out. I'm gonna upload every image with the prompts.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, so you're gonna have all of them there.
Cool.
Well, yeah, I wanted to make sure that the text was accessible. And just a heads up, some of it is weird. The ones that are weird, those aren't mine. So keep that in mind. Okay, so with any good technology, right, the first thing is we got to talk about how this works. So let's start with that. Are we running? There we go. So one of the biggest sort of detriments of the whole AI thing is the name. Calling it artificial intelligence really is probably not the best for the general kind of public, because it's not intelligent, it's not smart. There's nothing going on that there's no mind behind this at this point. If I want to upset everyone who's ever programmed one, you can say it's glorified statistics, but that's to greatly oversimplify what's going on. Really, we're looking at patterns and how those patterns are used to kind of reference an image. One of the things that comes up a lot is like, is this going to Skynet the world and take over and blow everybody to death when it launches all the nuclear missiles by itself? And fun fact, the computer down here is an old 286. The entire system, at least in this country and most of the others, that runs the nuclear sort of launching systems it's these computers, and it's why IBM still makes replacement parts for all these. You can buy, new circuit boards for them, which is how I figured that out. I was like, why are all these things brand new? But you can imagine a Windows XP update that launches your nuclear arsenal is probably not a good idea. So really, there's three things that are kind of the primary AI image generation techniques right now. There's new ones coming out every day. And to be totally honest, I've been working on this for a couple months, and I keep having to update it as new information is coming out. So this is current as of like 2 weeks ago, a week ago. But if you're interested in something and it seems inaccurate, it probably is. There's probably a lot of new stuff that's coming out. So the big ones, text to image generation is probably the most common one right now. It's what's been talked about the most. It is sort of, even though it's listed first, it's sort of the middle to newer-ish version of this. The NST, the new neural style transfer, was kind of an early version of this, and that was kind of taking one photo with a style and one photo with the content and just merging those two together. And I'll show some better, at least, images of these. And then the image to image generation, which is, kind of coming into play a little bit more now, is a combination of a reference image and a little bit of text. So this first one here, this is the text that was written to make that image. And there are the beliefs that there's a certain art to writing the prompts. I've tried my best to identify patterns. I found stuff that works. I found stuff that doesn't work, but it's hard to really reverse engineer the prompt writing process. Again, possibly to the, art's detriment. There's so much information as far as what prompts generate what images. You see a lot of the same things come up. You see other artists that are referenced a lot over and over again. And whether it's, people seeing that in someone else's prompts or, coming to that conclusion naturally, who knows? But there are certain ways to write these so that they give you the images you want. This is that neural style transfer. So, again, content, style, end result between the two. Sorry, this is a little pixelated too. I didn't quite transfer the way that we had hoped. But that again was one of the early styles of doing text to image. And then this, all the sort of icons on the splash page were made through the AI too. So taking an input image, taking a bit of text, and then getting an output. And with all of these, there's certain levels of adjustability. So in this particular process, you can say, really try and focus on the image and make it as close to the image as possible, or really focus on the text and make it as close to the text as possible. This one is a 50-50 blend. So got to do the fun game. You got to guess which one's what. So first one, if it's AI, raise your hand. First one, no, photo. Second one, AI. Third one, last one.
AI.
Close. It's even, I have no idea which one's what at this point. I can't, there's certain giveaways with humans and with more complicated images. I'm cheating because I'm using apples, but here's one more for you though. One is AI, one is a painting. So who thinks that one's AI? Maybe. Second one?
Nice.
It's just, and again, I'm not the best at doing this yet, but it's, like I said, hard for me to tell a lot of the time. So, okay, let's get into how this works. And I can pretty much guarantee you that this would upset artists, programmers, and mathematicians because I'm going to try my best. This is what I have been digging through to try and figure this out, and it is rough. I have talked to a couple of mathematicians that, PhDs in math, and I sent one of them a paper and asked what was going on, and he's like, I have no idea. Like, it is just completely unknown. But I have come to a good kind of basic way to explain this, and I have to say too, the Stable Diffusion subreddit has been incredibly helpful with this. I've gotten a lot of good info off of there, and it's led me down to a lot of sort of places where I could find good information. So, okay, we're going to talk about how this system was built. So, picture of a dog. And this is a dog that was either found through something called the Common Crawl Project, which was a sort of system that was archiving and storing internet data since 2011, massive amounts, terabytes and terabytes of data. Fortunately, a lot of the images used in that were tagged, either with metadata or, in some cases, people sitting down, looking at pictures and describing them with text. Sometimes you'll see those captcha things that have, click all the things that are a bus. Some of that has probably ended its way up into this as well. So start with dog, and what the algorithm that was trained to kind of generate these is doing is it's slowly adding noise, random pixels, and it's saying, what steps do I have to take to get from dog to completely random noise? So it sort of records that as dog. Then, starting with random noise, you can run that same algorithm essentially backwards and start to find a dog within it. There's a phenomena, I wrote it down, but not on this slide, of It's the phenomena of when you look at clouds and you see shapes, when you look at wood grain and you see faces. Parador, that's so glad you're in the front. Parador. I knew there was doily in it somewhere. Pareidolia. So that process, you can think of it as sort of like that, where the software is trying to find those patterns. And in fact, the earlier slide that showed the combination of text and the actual image, what that is doing is essentially, instead of using noise, it's using that initial image in some regard as the starting place. So then it's trying to pull those patterns out of a pre-existing image, which is another cool way to go about it. But you can tell from this one, so we started with dog and got to noise, and this dog is not the same as that dog, because when you have millions of images of dog, it's trying to sort of find any of those dogs that it can get to. And sometimes it's a combination of this dog and a little bit of that dog, and we're not really sure. I mean, and by combinations, we're thinking 5 or 6 pixels that are attached to each other, not, sections of arms and legs. But when you have the dog algorithm, if you then add in the black dog algorithm, it's running both simultaneously, the dog algorithm and the black algorithm, and you end up with a black dog. That's as basic as I can explain it. There's a lot more that's going on, and I would love to get into all of it, but I truthfully am having a hard time wrapping my own brain around it a little bit. But this is, at its core, what is going on. So workflow for this is typically, you think of the text you want to use, you find a model, and in this case, model refers to that trained data set. So Common Crawl Project, Stability AI was sort of the first group to really train a massive generalized model of images. So really a lot of the models that are being used now, even there are at this point hundreds, if not thousands of them that are out there, a lot of them refer back to that initial data set with the digits. If you're using a model that you say want to generate a bunch of cars with, you may have someone who's put that together by taking pictures of cars, manually tagging them and uploading them one after another. So these are trained in various ways, but really, once you have the model you want to use, you're essentially pressing play. It's what's running on the other screen is you take that text, you take that model, and because the noise that's generated is always completely random, every image that comes out of it is going to be completely random, completely different. And then there's all sorts of things we'll talk about with post-process and then evaluation, and then really iterating and execution. So what I'm going to go into now is, because I have used this quite a bit in my own work, I'm going to talk about 3 projects that I've put together. And then I'm going to just sort of show some examples of other artists' practices and how they've been able to utilize it. So starting off with this tree. So my work, I teach sculpture here. I don't teach anything in 2D. But my workflow has a lot to do with digital modeling, CAD modeling, and then building things based off of those models. A lot of 3D printing, a lot of machining. That's kind of what I do and what I like. But because I'm using that tech, almost everything starts off as a 3D model or in an image of a 3D object that you can pan around. So what I found I can do is I can take my sort of initial ideation that I'm doing in CAD and then use those images to permeate off of it. Really is just inspiration or something, some idea of what I could possibly do differently to make something more interesting. So running these overnight, running lots and lots and lots of permutations of things, it's just, like in this case, okay, there's the support structure up the side. What if that's integrated into, the shape of the tree? It's a lot of just sort of guessing and evaluating with what we have. One of the fun things about this is that you don't always have to use an image as is, because the software is able to take sort of a generalization of what you're putting in and then giving you output. So I can go into Microsoft Paint, embarrassingly, I promise it's Photoshop most of the time, and just sort of doodle in roughly what I want to do and then let the software go through and possibly fill in that. Because it's trained on actual photos, things like perspective, a lot of material sort of inputs look pretty accurate. Really tight symmetry, really tight repetitive patterns are 2 of the things it's not so hot at, along with hands and text and all the things that we sort of see a lot of the time. But the other fun thing I've been playing with is because I'm able to run these images with sort of slight iterations and slight changes, I can actually, once those images are generated, take them all together and then run them back in as animation. So again, that's just sort of two more examples.
And then Ben, this is something that you someday hope to bring into the real world as an actual thing.
Yes, and it's the tech isn't quite there with generating true three-dimensional objects off of three-dimensional CAD files off of the text that's inputted. It probably will soon. I kind of found a hacky way around that though, because there's a process, not to get too overly technical, but you can take a grayscale image. This is used for topography a lot of the time. The U.S. Geological Service Society uses when they do topographical maps now, basically true black will represent sea level, and then true white will represent Everest. And you get these grayscale images that represent everything between there. So the grayscale corresponds to the height. I can generate really high contrast patterns, and then I can take the blacks out, use those as an upper level of the model, and then cut away the white, which is actually how this cover was made. Using that process is generate a funky pattern, pull away the whites, and then you have an outline for something you can cut out.
Yeah, it's kind of like printmaking, really.
Yeah, it's very similar. And again, I see down the road that technology is going to evolve for sure. But one of the things you can see in these images is that the two objects that are on top, I'm really trying to figure out what I want to do with the base. The problem is that it just sort of puts some random things in the top. Fortunately, the software now is able to mask certain areas off. So I can say, look, just work only with these areas and try and give me something unique, but keep this where it is. So lots of images. And then because I'm using 3D software, I can say rotate around a model and then use each of those as a different generation to create animation.
Oh, wow.
And there is a fair bit of this sort of animation is starting to show up online and even in commercials and other things. And right now it has this sort of sketchy, textury feel to it, even though this is deliberately supposed to be kind of textury. But now people are kind of figuring out ways to sort of smooth that rotation out and take an image that's much more complex and it's called tweening, but blend between one frame to the next, which you can see in animation. Eventually, animators found out they could, that everything didn't have to be so choppy.
So can you manipulate this in 3D space, or is that look like a GIF animation?
That's just a straight animation. Yeah, it was based off of taking that initial image here and then rotating that in my rendering software and outputting images, rotate a little bit, image, rotate a little bit, image. And so I was able to use that giant pile of images one at a time. And because the reference image is slowly moving, the output image also slowly moves, but sometimes it jumps backward.
But it's not a 3D file. It's not something I can.
That is not a 3D
take
file.
it into a 3D program and move it to 3D.
Couldn't print it, couldn't do any of that yet with the AI side of it, only the input. The other thing that tends to happen with this is because, there's, as you can see from the other screen, you can just let it run and let images develop, is that eventually you end up with all of your hard drives being completely full of images and you have to start deleting things. So that is one of the other problems. So that's kind of just an example of my work when it comes to art. In my professional sort of work, I do a lot with cars, automotive industry. And right now with one of my clients, we are building a Manta kit car, the Manta Mirage, which was a kit car that came out back in the early 70s to replicate the old McLaren race cars. So this is the one we have. This is the kit car itself. It's just sort of clamped together in this picture outside my shop, but that is what it looks like. Because I'm doing a good amount of exterior work on it, it was necessary to 3D scan this entire car. So going through 3D scanning everything and then assembling it in my modeling software and then rendering it out as a basic rendering. I mean, there are ways to do very, very complicated rendering that requires a lot of time, but then taking that rendering and going through and doing 2D permutations off of that just to make good looking sort of marketable imagery. So a lot of times it is starting with something like these, which are the direct output, and then coming back through manually and drawing, sketching on top of it, doing kind of my own work to it. So this is kind of what the end result is of that. So taking some output, sketching on top of it, and this is all based off of what I did is I took that big model data set, scanned about 25 of my old sketchbooks, and then built a model that was based off the way that I like to draw. So what I can do is kind of come in here and use my own work as the reference to create the output, which is pretty cool. And then everything always gets a little bit of tweaking, kind of dolling up at the end. So that's just one example of that. But again, because I did this last week, is figuring out this whole animation thing. So I've slowly been trying to figure out different ways that I can iterate through, animations and see things that way. But yeah, that's kind of the end result of that.
And that's what you guys are gonna build eventually?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if it's gonna get as wild as some of the renderings I've done, because, it's budgets and things.
Yeah.
But it is just fun, and, the more I look at a vehicle, the more kind of ideas I get, and it's true with the other projects too, and even the images that are on the far screen. It's not necessarily saying, this is great, I'm gonna go build this now. It's just seeing little parts here and there that kind of spark something that you might not have thought of. And that's, at least for my own work, that's what I like doing. So one more use case on my end, and then we'll get to other stuff. Back, way back in 2009, I was doing a lot more 2D digital work. But at the time, I was printing these things that were 3 or 4 feet tall, very, very limited by memory of the computers, what was able to be processed, the resolution of digital cameras. So I have a lot of this old imagery. I know that everything's scaled down and kind of pixelated on the screen, but believe me, this one's actually really, really pixelated in real life because it was just what I had. So going through and taking sections of this image, blowing those up, and then running that through the AI systems, I'm able to generate stuff that's similar, stuff that's completely random, and then taking the same concept of the piece, going back through and then editing it to now have much more resolution, get the content I want, and then kind of reassemble my own image back into a new sort of composition. And that's been extra fun. So just a few more examples. I know there's a bunch that are coming up over there, but I wanted to just show not my field of work so much. Photography, drawing, I love doing that. It's not my specialty, but just a few examples of how others can kind of work this into their practices. For ceramics especially, glazing can always be kind of a tricky thing for some people. You're not always sure what you're going to get, but because so many of the glazes that are out there have been tagged, entering a serial number and then an image of your own unfired piece, you can see what it will look like with the proper perspective, with the proper size and everything, with those glazes on it before you have to commit to one. Same thing with jewelry. Just basic prompts are a great way to kind of run through those images and see what's possible. So I enjoy doing kind of the random surreal imagery. I've always loved other surreal artwork. I've not been the best at making it. I also am a huge sci-fi nerd, so seeing sort of fun, interesting sci-fi stuff. If I have a long day, I come home exhausted and I just want to see something new. It's, you could say, watching a screensaver, but I have some stuff that I like looking at, and it's a great way to see it. So a few examples: graphic iterations, graphic design work, inputting things like proper proportions or, to scale. There's words that you can put in there that will guide what you're getting as output. So you can kind of constrain things in a very specific way, not to mention that whole process of masking stuff off and being able to work with, one aspect of an image and refine based off of that. So, okay. Few more things, and then I want to talk about, some of the controversy stuff, some of the kind of things that we're facing in the news and seeing as far as people who are critiquing this stuff. Of course, got to have some fun memes in there. But what's really interesting is the center one is a newspaper comic from 1933 where really eerily predicting in the year 2023 that this would be the process of creating cartoons. So we have the cartoon dynamo down there, patent number 2021. And then the idea dynamo, the ink, and then the robot that is then drawing the cartoon while our wonderful cartoonist goes out and goes fishing with his friends. So an interesting way to, I don't know if that maybe a time travel or something. But one of the other, examples I've looked at a lot as far as where we might be going with copyright, where things might end up is in music. And there was a certain period of time around the late 90s, early 2000s, where sampling, taking bits and pieces of songs and sort of recombining them into a new piece was kind of just a free-for-all. The copyright laws hadn't, as with AI, haven't really caught up with what the artists were doing. The really interesting thing is that the sort of decision was made that it had to be, a song had to be 15% different to qualify as a new piece of work. And there's also a limit on the amount of time that you could pull from a sample. The fun thing about that, and if we look at this potentially relating to AI as it goes forward, is those same artists, the really good ones who were making work off of those samples before it was copywritten, made so much money selling those tracks and making music that way that to continue their practice, they then bought the rights from the original artists to make their new music. And in some cases, there's a band called Girl Talk, which is a little profane, but still pretty good. He had released an album online in YouTube, 2008. There wasn't so much of a copyright thing going on there either. That was all sampled from classic rock and other things that, really expensive stuff that you would need to buy the rights to. He ended up eventually, after a good amount of success, buying the rights for every song he used originally and released the album. So there's always been this debate of, this is stealing work and it's taking away from artists. In that particular example, it really benefited the artists, both new and old. So of course, I have a wonderful video showing some examples. So close, but transfer one into the other. So, okay.
There's a huge controversy on that.
Oh, yeah, and Vanilla Ice was the other one that
Yeah.
really had some issues with that, but I don't exactly know how those two played out. I mean, the song's still out there, so you can listen to it. Okay, so
Well, Ben, do you see that it's going in the same direction that sampling went, or is it gonna be a whole different thing?
I think that it's a pretty good, if the Copyright Office is following sort of its previous decisions, and I have a couple excerpts that are from what their most recent kind of release on that stuff is, I see it as one really likely possible way that it could go. So I wanted to, it's a little harder to read, but this is just some of the takeouts from it. There are some issues with AI art, obviously, and people have been very keen on pointing them out. One of the biggest issues is very, very inherent bias in the data sets, because the AI algorithms are taking a starting point and then finding an end point without they're finding patterns to kind of get there. Often it it ignores some of the process that happens in the middle. So you find bias that is coming out in those algorithms. One of the big ones is that a lot of the early language models were trained off of incredibly inappropriate subreddits and things with conspiracy theories and other just crazy stuff. And because that's part of your data set, that can still come through. So that's kind of a battle in a lot of ways. A big part of programming AIs and what has been attempted for a number of years now is trying to look at the way the human brain works, look at the neurotransmitters and the neural pathways, and emulate that with a computer. The problem being that the human brain has sort of trillions of those switches, and we're able to get with the most advanced computers now about 1 billion. So, to quote our guy at the bottom, that's for the hardware guys to fix at some point, but we're not quite there yet. The copyright though, that is sort of the interesting thing. God, I'm sorry, that's so hard to read. This whole presentation will be online too, so you guys can look back at it if you have any interest. So derivative work based off of another artist's work, there are things that are allowed. I mean, straight up going to a gallery, photographing someone's stuff, selling it as your own, doesn't fly. But this really sort of sums it up for most of us, is that AI generated images, when modified, when changed, when built into something entirely new, represent a new original work. At the end of the day, you've got pixels in a square or a circle or whatever. But you calculate 255 possible combinations of every pixel, and then a couple thousand pixels by a couple thousand pixels, you have trillions times trillions of possible permutations of an image. And to say that pulling a few of those pixels from one artist or another artist, dead or alive, is it's a question, and it's should those original artists be receiving copyright for it? Possibly. It might turn out that their use in models is going to be something that will need to be copywritten. I have found in my own experience that while adding in artists' names or basically drawing out of those models specific artists who are still alive is a great way to get certain results, it's not necessary. And if somehow you were to reprogram these models and eliminate the names of any modern artist who's alive, who doesn't consent, or the state who doesn't consent to having their images used in those models, it's going to be a drop in the bucket of the possibility of what's still there with those models. So
but when you're talking about what's the difference between a reference and a sample? There's a big difference between those two things.
So if
we reference artists just with our own minds using them, you know what I mean?
It's a big part of it, and I'm hesitant to go in and call out artists in general. But if you show me almost any artist, well, not if you show me, if you show a great art historian, almost any artist, modern artist, they will be able to tell you the other work that looks like that person, that is directly referenced by that person, that shows elements of their style. I mean, and it's just by looking at work, seeing something you like, and then going to your own studio and making something. I mean, subconsciously, if you have that idea in your mind, how is that not going into Canvas? If you ever talk to, which I would not recommend, professional comedians, they will steal each other's jokes accidentally, not because they're trying to, but because they'll remember or not remember hearing it at some point, come up with an idea, like it, and tell the same joke, 5 years later after George Carlin did it. So there's certain things that, people are dispositioned to, people are drawn to, and, when you really dive into the nitty-gritty technical side, and believe me, there are people out there who can explain it a lot better than I can, the way that those patterns are found in noise. And what I'm going to do actually real quick is on the other monitor, I'm going to turn on a setting that will allow us to see that process. So let's go ahead and turn that on.
There's really no tradition in art history of calling anything a sample. That doesn't
in visual arts,
The word is reference.
Yeah,
Same thing.
or in
it's
some
not
cases
though,
collage,
because one you have to pay for and the other you don't.
Okay, so
The sample is direct.
Yeah.
what this is doing is
Reference.
it's running that noise algorithm to try and
recognize.
create that image. And I already know this is the first image, so I restarted, it's going to be, well, the other ones will be a surprise, but this one is going to be a man's face looking to the left with a big beard and maybe some goofy stuff all over him with a forest in the background. So you can see it's trying to build that, and what it does with that diffusion, it's not a one-shot deal. It goes and it takes the noise and tries to create dog or, weird bearded man in this case, and then it goes back to noise and then back to the image, and it keeps checking if it has a higher likelihood of being what we think it is each time. And that is, this is happening, it's sort of taking, this process is showing snapshots along thousands of these iterations. So we're stopping the algorithm every once in a while to put that image out there. And then you can pull a really interesting jacket, pull the diffused image out of there.
Based on the text prompt.
Based on the text prompt, yes. It's and what it's doing at its core is it's something called tokenizing. So it's not taking each individual word. If you say, 3 ships, it is understanding that as one idea of multiple ships. A ship is not the word a and then ship, it's a single ship. So sometimes, a red dog, it may understand because it has so many images of Clifford that it is a red dog. Sometimes it needs red and it needs dog and it needs to do those at the same time. So it's kind of hard to always pull out what that tokenizing process is. There are algorithms out there where you can watch and see how those things are pulled out, but that is the way that it sort of understands what you're typing in as text.
How good do your linguistic skills need to be? Are you thinking noun, adjective, verb, noun?
Well, let me put it this way. I am awful at spelling and it gives me the right images with typos. So it's, it's pretty good because enough people have tagged an image with the same typos, I believe. So, yeah, I mean, that's really what we're looking at as far as process. So that, in fact, I believe, playing my own presentation is my last slide. So let me answer questions.
If you give it the same prompt and the same pictures and run it twice, you get the same thing.
Sometimes. So what there's something that all these start with called a seed. And that seed is a specific number that correlates to that random pattern of noise. And at its core, it's a very long logarithmic equation that will generate that noisy kind of texture. And sometimes, most of the time, if you use the same seed with the exact same text, you will get roughly the same image. If the data set is sort of still learning and still sort of trying to train itself, there might be somewhere on this very complicated map where a 0.00001 margin of error was rounded and it may be pulled one way or another. So you'll get these little deviations, but for the most part, with the same software, the same models, the same samplers, you can generate the same image twice. But I truthfully haven't been able to do it very much. I tend to just run it on random seeds, but it is possible.
So it seems to me that an artist could tightly control this if they uploaded all their own photographs, only put in things that were of their style. Would that even be useful? Would that be using it in the wrong way?
Well, that's the thing is there's still, for use cases, there's still not really a wrong way. I mean, I think that the worst thing you can get is sort of horror show pictures out of it where people are mangled and disfigured. It has a really hard time with hands. There was very recently, everyone has brought it up, the photographer in Germany who won the photography contest and then did receive the award. If you look at that image and you look at the bottom of it, you can see the people's hands and they're sort of, it's something that it just doesn't quite understand. But by using that masking process where you're sort of saying, hey, regenerate just this area, if I have a picture, everything is great, the hands are messed up or the background's the wrong color, I can mask off just that area, set it up to do 500 images and then just go to bed for the night and wake up the next morning and just find one of those.
Is it learning or is it just generating random hands that you, the operator, choose? Is it actually learning how to do better?
So locally, it is not learning. So when I run this on my computer, this will run, everything that's running right now will run without an internet connection. This is a model that is saved, and it doesn't, the models that are generated, they're 4 or 5 gigabytes or so in size. They're not just an album of pictures. It's the algorithm, it's the math that it takes to get from that noise to, the actual it programs in there, assuming that every pixel is one.
That's kind of the issue, though, is that unless you're only running a closed system.
When I am running it here, when the people who are
Hold on
building
one
the
second,
models
Rita,
are able to do it, they are training it and setting it up so that they can kind of self-critique it.
But there's never any more code than what you install in your system. It's not.
Yes, absolutely. No, you're right. Yeah, it's not, it's not self-learning. Right, it's not self-learning off of my images. Now, there are other pieces of software I can download to train my own models, which is how I built the one for the sketching. That was me manually inputting about maybe 500 images. It wasn't a big data set. I mean, it's what I've sketched over the last 15 years or so. But I was able to train it based off of that data set. And I could go back through and add more images to that data when I wanted to. But it's not auto learning, at least on this end. And you did mention like buying this stuff. This is all free.
Oh, it's all free.
Yeah, and the links I have, and I have some links on that handout to some of these that you can download and use locally if you have a computer that can run them, because this is still kind of cutting edge
It's
stuff.
like RAM eater program.
It's graphics cards.
Okay.
It needs a new graphics card, a really new graphics card.
Mhm.
That is the biggest sort of hurdle for running locally, but there are also websites where you can pay $5 a month. I actually did the math on it. I hooked up a power generator. This thing, if I run it overnight, it uses about $1.50 worth of electricity a day. So it's actually cheaper if I had done one of the online services, but you're limited by quality and other things. I've heard.
I think Rita, did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I did. I do think that is the way you're using it is like amazing, and is what I think you and I have talked about, how I would use this technology in my own work to create different iterations and stuff from prompts. But I see the only problem so far is that it's not how it's being used online, which is the majority of how it's used, because you have to be kind of technically savvy to download all the open source software and install it, like you said, and you've spent so much time like learning how to work these programs. But I think the music licensing kind of sampling idea could work, because there's ways that we can input metadata into our images when we put them on the internet, because all of the generators are literally stealing images from every database that they can find. So there's just not, artists put their work up with a consent to view, but not to use, and some are being straight out copied. So I like the music model. Like we could, with this technology, we can absolutely control like where this image came from, and people can get paid licensing fees. I think it's just going to be up to us, the artists, to like force the technology groups who are putting these machines out, putting these generators out there, force them to do it, because we as poor artists aren't going to be able to afford to go after what's rightfully ours.
Well, the government needs to get involved.
There's a couple things, and first of all, most importantly,
Yeah, that's
I would
great,
not-
Rita.
like, I would not be doing any of this if it wasn't for Rita, because she's the one who originally showed me all this. Unfortunately hooked me on it too.
Sorry.
So for a big thank you for that. So a couple really good points. I think one of the things to think about too is that, yes, you might at some point down the road, if it does become regulated, you buy for $1 the Damien Hirst plugin, and then you have that set of images. And I think that's fantastic. I think being able to compensate artists that way. I mean, if you look at what Spotify has done with musical artists, I mean, they are now, garage bands are able to upload their stuff to Spotify and be paid royalties off of it. And
You know what those royalties are?
fractions of pennies. It's not great.
Yeah.
But we're artists. We're used to that. It's something. I mean, that's fantastic.
It is bad. The royalties are awful. We need to do better.
It's fractions of pennies. It is bad. But the other thing too to think about is that, and it's an analogy I've brought up a million times, is if you go to the hardware store and you buy a hammer, and you can build a fence with it. You can also use the same hammer to kill your neighbor. It's, that doesn't mean we're all gonna wanna put in nails by pliers, but it does bring up some of the issues is what, what does need to happen so that this is being used fairly. In my experience, I was more concerned about the copyright issues when I didn't understand how the algorithms worked, but now that I've sort of started to see that, I can enter, I've done sort of, and anyone can do this on a lot of these sites that I have listed here, they have free trials and stuff, you don't pay any money, you can just sort of go and play around. And there's so many popping up, you just Google AI imaging and find one somewhere. But entering the name of a modern artist and just their name, nothing else, and seeing what comes out, and it's not their work. It's not images that are direct copies of their work. Sometimes it's not even close to their work, especially if you are an artist whose name is like James Smith. You're never going to see his work in any of those. So the more unique your name is, the Greg Rutowski, I believe, is
Yeah,
is
him.
very, very vocal about it. And then as sort of a,
He's worried though. He's
Silver
right because
Prop on one, and
What?
the result was very delineant.
yeah,
You wouldn't mistake it for a Dali painting, but it was very delineant in style.
And I think it depends, if you go to a museum and you look at a painting versus if you go to a museum, take a picture of that painting and then sell it at the shop that you opened up outside the museum, there's two very different use cases that people, and I've had this belief in many other fields, which we're not going to talk about, is that there are people that are going to do bad things, and they always are going to do bad things. And if it isn't this, it's going to be another way to do it. But do we ban hammers? I don't know. It's an interesting way to think about it. Rita, sorry, you had something else.
right, like that Mark guy who's been used more AI prompts than any other artist alive or dead. And he's a digital artist, and you can see when someone uses his prompts, it looks like his work. And so he will face kind of a bit of erasure in the online world, because when you type in his name, it's going to bring up a bunch of AI generated art. So he's concerned about that. But also, like
I've
what
got
you
two
said,
things, just sorry, read it real quick because I just want to, before I forget, because I will forget these things. Two really interesting things to look at. So Greg Rutowski is the guy's name. If you look through Google Trends, will allow you to see the search history for a term over a long period of time. He has gotten so much publicity for being that person. And one of the reasons he was used so extensively is because he was one of the first people to come out against AI imaging. And I think as kind of a big, people start using his name a lot. It also, if you look at his work, I mean, you could say that he's copying every fantasy novel from the 1980s as far as his painting style too. I don't, and I'm not critiquing his work. I don't want to say anything about it. It's bad, but
It's not Van Gogh. I mean,
if your work can only be copied visually without the concept, the intent, the other things that the AI can't do. I mean, if artwork's about saying something, how much did you really have to say in the beginning if it's that easily copyable? Not a critique. I think the guy's stuff's amazing. I sure as hell can't paint like that. But it brings up a lot of those questions.
like ethics, right? Like, is this good for our community? Like you said, there's always going to be people who use things for harm and bad. I mean, if you're into the GPT, like look up Chaos GPT and GPT-4, which has taught itself new languages that it wasn't programmed to learn. And Chaos GPT is like basically like only designed to figure out how to destroy the human race.
Yeah, and again, people can do bad things.
So we definitely have to put pressure, to force the hand of the government and these big companies to make sure there's ethical safeguards in place for everyone.
Oh, and I'm definitely of the theory that when you start pulling large corporations into any of those things, there's going to be issues. And
Well, as soon as they can make money off of us, they will, like Spotify, who pays fractions of pennies when they should be paying the artists more.
but to be fair, the primary predecessor to Spotify was a piece of software called Groove Shark, and it didn't pay anybody any royalties. It was people would upload whatever CD
There were
they had,
several.
and have
There were
access to one
several.
that anybody else had.
What, are you too young to remember Napster?
Now, I mean, Napster,
Napster.
the difference between the two though, is that Napster, you could pick one artist at a time. Groove Shark gave you this access to a huge, like as Spotify does, this huge library of everyone's music at a click remotely. But another good way to look at it too, is that if you look at Actually, never mind, we're not gonna do that. Sorry, it's about data storage
But
and.
I'm just saying the music thing can work. The music licensing model can work because we can input metadata. We have the ability to track it with these technologies. We just have to force their hand to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So beyond copyright issues, what are the other pitfalls? What about like deep fakes? What
Yeah,
about the public's changing attitude toward art because of this? Will there be one?
I mean, it's, you know, the cop out is, time will tell, but it is, again, it goes back to that same thing, you know, if there are people that are gonna use it for really, really bad stuff, they're going to use it. I think the more important thing to think about, though, is those biases that are built into those models. You know, and I'm not going to go through some of them, but one of the ones that is quoted very, very often is just ethnicities and who comes up for what countries, what those people are depicted doing. I mean, any type of racism, sexism, anything else you could think of that has a bias to it, it will appear and it is prevalent in that data set. The numbers I have found in my research are about 5%. You get a 5% of sort of the wrong thing. And over time, those things could get better, they could get worse. For example, on this particular session that I'm running over here, I have a trigger on there that is filtering out nudity. And they've been able, the same way that the models are trained, they're able to use probably a really interesting data set to figure out all the different ways that you know, nudity or pornography is portrayed, and try as best as possible to filter all those out. So it is evolving, and I mean, it brings up a lot of questions that I don't have answers to,
I mean,
unfortunately.
there are
but I
probably
think-
uses for it that we have no idea about.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I mean, it is getting to the point, I just in the last couple of months, the difference between what would, you know, be photorealistic and what wouldn't be. I mean, you're seeing a lot of, there was someone on the Facebook page who saw the picture of the border collie and was, that doesn't look like a border collie. It does now, just in 2 months, it's, you saw the dogs come up, they look like real dogs, sometimes they have 5 or 6 legs, but regardless of that, they can look like a dog. But yeah, it does, it definitely brings up a lot of those things, and I've noticed that just the process of editing the text and just sort of playing with things, I mean, it's a scientific method, you're trying to change 1 or 2 variables at a time and see what happens. It is an interesting way to see sort of where that goes.
So where are we in terms of it? Are we year 1? Are we?
Oh, this is 1.0.
I mean, are we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't even tell you. I honestly, I mean, I see. I mean, I had to keep updating this presentation as things came out weekly, and then so, you know, someone was telling me there's a Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson interview that they talk about it, which I haven't seen yet because.
Yeah.
But I'd love to take a look at that.
One of them.
One of them. Nah, both.
All right, let me ask a question. One topic that comes up over and over and over in art school is meaning.
Right.
So the prompts that are used to generate this are generally all descriptive.
Sure.
What would happen if you said, I actually tried this in a different way, but can you, instead of saying, you know, a dog or a black dog, can you say, you know,
An angry, expressive,
Angry.
painful abstract sculpture?
Right.
Absolutely. Some of the ones that are on there are done that way.
because I tried it with one of the text AI and I said, show me an angry, happy man.
So
And the sucker locked up.
what we're gonna do,
I wanted to give it a paradox to see what it would do.
we'll call it user error.
No,
But yeah, I mean, that, it does work. In fact, I can go ahead and give you an example of this. So, I'm going to type in, let's see, let's do, in fact, let me get rid of this and give you guys the whole view here.
Show me an angry banana.
Okay. Very angry. Yeah, good question too.
Yeah.
What's that?
Oh, I was just thinking about how the early versions of things become interesting. How the hands are different and the dogs are a little warped and things like that. The early versions of these things, won't they become collectible as a thing? Like that was when, you know, the hands were warped,
Yeah.
right? As it becomes more refined, it actually becomes more banal.
Well,
If it becomes too good.
right now, among, you know, even if 13, 14-year-olds, the reemergence of old digital cameras has been a huge thing.
Right.
I mean, that
8-bit stuff.
analog type of imaging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good time to collect those before it gets too good.
There's so many of them, you wouldn't be unable.
You'll have to hang on to that old computer to run that old software.
Yeah, right. I want to go back to version 1.
And what is readily available too, that common crawl data set, the original data sets are still out there. So I added in HD high resolution, it just makes it work better. I mean, and there's some stuff that like that, it just, it is referencing those images. So, the thing with emotions, because so many images that are out there, that's still solar now. That's all right. But because there's so many images out there that are, emotionally based, that are portraits, you end up getting people a lot of the time. So we might get a yellow person. But the cool thing is you have these negative prompts down here. So we can say, hey, we don't want people. So right now, nudity are in there. Let's try person, figure. Like nightmares picking in real time. And this speed that this is running is sort of medium. I mean, there are people whose computers can run this much faster. Some of the online services can run much faster, but some are a lot slower too. He doesn't look angry at all. I mean, maybe he's screaming. I don't know.
He's being tortured.
I'll tell you right now. The baby
His head's being,
tied up.
yeah,
I'll tell you right now.
tortured.
If you want to try and reverse engineer the software, you're going to drive yourself crazy. You'll pull your hair out.
That could be a cartoon character. We should do a show around that.
Yeah.
There's
So
also.
who owns it?
There's a great John Oliver episode that talks about AI art, and one a little bit later where he shows what everybody who responded to his program by making AI art about him
Oh, God.
made, and it's
So
better
good,
too. So
so good.
Say your mood at this. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's really hard to hear. Go ahead, Rita.
Oh, no, just John Oliver art was so good. You should follow AI Universe on Facebook. I know most of you are on there.
AI universe on Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah, it used to be like Midjourney, and then it changed its name to like Stable Diffusion. So there might be some groups like that. You don't have to really know anything about AI to join the groups. A lot of people share their work and their prompts, and then what they did like in Photoshop afterwards. And then there's also discussions about ethics and usage, and is this art? What is art? How is this going to affect artists and stuff like that?
if you Google AI art workflow included in quotation marks, you'll find a lot more of that process stuff. A lot more kind of what I was showing too. It's fascinating to see that. Lexica, lexica.com. Oh,
There we go.
you can see how it's addictive. It's just and
creepy.
from a technical standpoint, it is actually. I kid you not, you could turn on a setting where it rings a bell every time it's done, which is a little bit all the way, but it releases dopamine. Every time it's like you get an image, the hit of dopamine, there's a reason it becomes addictive. That's not talked about a whole lot, but I think it will be after a while. Again, the subreddit that I was reading, there are a few people who've mentioned that like I am losing focus at work. I'm thinking about stuff I want to make when I get home. And I had the same thing when I first started with it. And then I just told myself I couldn't do that.
Have you heard about people working there?
Rita,
Using
sorry,
it-
one second. I got
You go ahead,
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead, Rita.
So what I've been finding more and more of are people having multiple jobs where they're having AI do 80% of the work, including emails back to their bosses. They're using like Pipoli, Describe, and Syllabi to like do their work for them and go in and make any minor adjustments.
It's and the text-based AI stuff, I have to fully admit, I don't know. Like
Oh my gosh, that's
it's
just
wild.
a bigger rabbit hole for anyone interested in this. Look up the Chat GPT and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Rita, I think that would put a lot of sort of small town journalists out of work because basically you could create almost any kind of small town newspaper through AI at this point.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Sorry, whatever.
go ahead, sir.
So. Could this AI and actual handmade art, could that actually improve the for real artists? Because the AI will be so prevalent and we so passe that people are going to be looking for the quality of the.
Yeah.
Handmade.
Could it be a resurgence of skill?
I can tell you right now
They'll be actually looking for, it's not
The
perfect.
human touch.
So in my experience, I can tell you a really good, another good analogy for that. So my business here is primarily machining and doing kind of automotive stuff. My shop used to be based out of California, and a huge part of my work, well over 80%, was in the film entertainment industry building physical props. As CG has gotten better, the need for physical builders has diminished. And that didn't happen. I mean, it happened quickly in a lot of ways, but it didn't happen overnight. You look at some of those movies from the early 2000s stuff, you can tell very bad CGI, but it now is getting to the point where, you know, I forget what, I think it was the guy who played Superman. He was doing another role and he had a mustache, and they removed the mustache from the other movie he was filming because they didn't want him to have a mustache. And in some places it looks, bad, but there are stills in other areas where you can tell. So I think it's going to be a question of what I noticed in the prop industry was that there are still physical props and there are still incredible builders who are making those. I wasn't one of the best. I was pretty good, but I wasn't one of the best. I knew I couldn't sustain my business that way, and I didn't really have an interest in doing CGI in that regard. So I migrated to something else. I'm not going to say, like, you know, are artists going to go the way of typesetters and telephone operators? I don't know. I hope not. I think that the people who really are thriving in that world, regardless of whether they integrate AI, are still going to thrive. And I think that there are a lot of people that are going to start using it or integrate it, early adopters, who will also thrive. And a lot are going to sort of float to the bottom, as artists always do.
I heard a commentator once say that in the future, they're going to pay the big bucks for real artists, hands-on stuff. Because AI is going to be so common.
Absolutely. I mean, just buying, if you, you'd have to plot them over time, but I mean, buying darkroom developed prints for photography. I mean, you can buy, any of us can go out and buy darkroom equipment at a garage sale for $15, but we're not going to be Ansel Adams. Like it is going to be interesting to see where it goes. And I do think, I absolutely think that there will always be. I mean, they thought that when the camera, not Photoshop, not digital camera, when the camera came out, people thought it was going to be the end of painting. When the printing press came out, people thought it was the end of discourse altogether. I mean, there have been a lot of times when people have freaked out about technology and it is just sort of leveled out over time.
My silver gel darkroom prints today are worth 10 times what they were worth in the 80s.
If you want to gift me one for my life.
What about for the artists who are digital, where it's literally all hand drawn, but it is done digitally? Like I have my process videos where you can see me drawing it, you know, and I can export that video. But how do you compete against AI art, which is also digital, when you're doing something by hand and then they'll like devalue your art because they think that a computer made it when it was not?
I think and I think going back to the text thing, but it's happening a lot in academic settings where the AI text generation is happening so quickly that things are being sort of falsely flagged as AI generated when someone wrote the essay, and then things are being presented as AI where people can't tell the difference. The hard part, you know, when digital photography first came out, you could tell a digital photo because it was trash. AI has evolved so much faster that a lot of digital paintings are indistinguishable from, you know, an AI generated painting.
Recording your process is key. I think what you just said, you're recording your process to show that you are a human being making the work. Whether or not
You have to present evidence of all
As
your
proof?
work. So, but here's the thing, and I think what will happen when the technological sort of phobia goes away, then it will become it won't become important whether or not it's made through that process, through AI, through someone who is such a good painter with acrylics that they can also represent the same imagery that way. It's going to be hard to say. And if you look at digital, if you've done digital art for a while, you've seen, there are people that thrive as digital artists and there are rough ones too.
Yeah.
So it's all going to be, I think, and as art has been for, centuries now, it's no longer altarpieces and, the Virgin Mary. You're getting ideas, if you have something to say, you're always going to have something to say.
There
And
has
if
to
your
be
work
an
represents
idea
that.
behind it, and AI can create that.
And that's what, yeah. Well,
Anytime I post, I make sure that one of the slides to the post is the video of me creating that artwork so that it is shown that I did this all by hand. Like some of the digital art that I have done, it actually took me 2-3 months to complete.
Yeah.
And it's like where I really went into the nitty gritty and the details. And it's like AI could just do that in 5 minutes. And it's like, no, this was a meticulous process. So I have to show
So the old adage for that, it's the family walking into the, modernist art gallery and going, my kid could have painted that in 5 minutes, but they didn't.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing. AI might have generated that, but it didn't.
Right.
You did. And that's the thing that's important.
But will it take?
Artist
intent.
Hopefully not. That's the best.
It'll create a whole new kind of.
Yeah, they're very. I'm gonna say more bananas. I'm not gonna start easy. But sorry, we can keep asking questions. But yeah, let's see. We're gonna 10 minutes left.
Can the AI handle lo-fi?
What do you mean?
Well, this is very slick.
Yes.
Now, one thing that has been a trend in Photoshop is using grunge overlays.
Oh, yeah.
So this is very slick. I would assume that this is AI on first glance.
So like the
But
sketching
if
of
it
the
had
cars.
grain
Oh, yeah.
Or, because I noticed that the Apple pictures, one of them was out of focus. And so obviously the AI understands depth of field.
Yes, it does. In fact, we can even map depth of field at this point. Wow.
But could I use AI to generate something that was distinctively lo-fi?
Like sketchy.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's even as simple as putting, high grit tooth paper as one of the,
Oh, okay.
one of the things on there, or, ink sketch. I mean, it really, just the word lo-fi on there would be good.
That's enough.
I've put in, analog photography as one, and it does give you sort of the film grain and other things and thus scratches and
It's
imperfections.
like if you put in woodcut, it could come up with a woodcut image.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like something from
Let's do
Dory.
an angry banana.
Or it'll show you a bleeding 2x4.
Yeah. I didn't even think of that. So Ben, after going through all this over the last few weeks, would you say you're cautiously optimistic about the future? Are you losing sleep at night, worrying about what's gonna happen to all?
No, for some reason. So,
Yeah.
I've did my undergrad in art, I did my graduate program in art, of 7 years of talking about what is art. And I mean, it always comes to the same answer, was if you say it is, it is. And I think that the initial shock of the tech is going to go away. I think that there are people that like with phone operators and with typesetters, like, those jobs don't exist anymore. And it might be that, they just don't. You're angry that they're not right.
We've already talked about getting rid of voiceover actors.
Digital transition
Mhm.
was, when digital was new, we saw a lot of noise. It's like,
Right.
here's the razzle dazzle, look what we got out of our computers. 2 years later, it was BFD, let's make some imagery. So
Absolutely.
I think we're gonna go through a very, very high noise era with this before it really finds its niche.
And
Or creates a.
as digital cameras got I mean, when digital cameras were first there, the amount of they weren't being posted online because they're online, but you take pictures of your garbage and show it to everyone because it was digital. I didn't have to develop this.
Yeah.
And the flash of that wore off. The flash of that wore off even as the technology relatively rapidly evolved.
Flash wore off on the flash.
Yeah.
Well, what we would like, Ben, is for you to come back in 6 months and give us another report from the front lines.
He's gotta
on
make-
what has changed.
Yeah.
Means I've made 6 months of work the week before. I'd love to. I
mean,
really would.
Do you think that in that amount of time, things will have changed a lot, right? I mean, if you're going by how much they've changed so far.
Yeah, I think they will. I think that there will at some point that either, If you look at digital tech, there is a leveling off area. You look at televisions especially, once you get to the point where you can fit 4 pixels into the space that a human eye can only discern as 1, where are you gonna go from there? Well, it's 3D and some other stuff, but I think that it will kind of level off at a certain point. There's an interesting thing I wasn't gonna talk about earlier, but I will now, the idea of storage, right? So when you're looking at digital storage, you can take the entire written work of all of humanity, written only as text, and you can store that on like, a memory card, like a cell phone, and have access to it all the time. I think eventually the idea of the cloud or, having digital music that you have to take off of Spotify and a server, it's like, no, you just download music and you have all of it now and it's on your computer and then you have the right.
Search to it.
Yeah, and you pay, $5.99 for
Yeah.
every piece of music ever written. Like as that data storage goes up, the access that you have, and as the computing and the processing power goes up, it might, if these were able to generate in 0.5 seconds and we could just type in banana, the next thing might be, and I love this idea, would be real-time entertainment. Like, I want to see a movie with Brad Pitt where he goes to the moon and murders a bunch of evil Nazis.
And that could
Right.
be after Brad Pitt's on.
Yeah, and you could watch, and and then it's like, 5 minutes in, you go, it's I'm bored now. Now I want to watch that. Which could, there's
Engine software for that.
and there's already things going on with video games where you have generative worlds where it's like pick a random seed, pick a random noise variable, and that is sort of abstracted into your map that you then play on.
Yeah.
It's being integrated, it is coming out. I'm excited to see where it goes.
I mean, it's interesting that these are being given away, so it's not the progress is not necessarily being driven by capitalism.
Right.
It's being driven by just people wanting to do it, I guess.
It will be capitalized on.
It is hard. I mean.
Thank you for that happy.
Sorry.
Somebody can make a buck off of it, they will, but I think overall, great firms. So. All right, you gotta get out here, so we gotta. Yeah.
So listen.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone who showed up online. This has been so interesting, and like I said, it's been recorded. We're gonna get this out through our social media, and you can watch it again, and we're gonna invite Ben back in about 6 months and have him give us an update. If the world still exists by then, who knows? Just real quick, May 3rd, Wednesday, May 3rd, Dale Odell is going to be giving a talk here in the gallery about judging the spring student show and giving candid advice for emerging artists on how to deal with your career or your lack thereof. So please show up here in the gallery. The weather's nicer, it's staying lighter longer. I mean, if I have to start getting drinks in here or whatever, we want more people in the gallery, but we're still gonna be showing it online too. So that's the next one, May 3rd. Thanks for everybody for coming out. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Ben.
Very nice.
Awesome. You got a wave on Zoom. Awesome.